Imagine a life built on privacy, a life intentionally disconnected, powered by the sun, nestled in a custom-built tiny home far from the city's hum. This was Amelia Amy Rao's world. At 30, she was a brilliant cybersecurity analyst, an ethical hacker who used her talents for a tech nonprofit. She was meticulous, fiercely private, and lived by her own rules, off the grid. But in the shadows of the nearby metropolis, another power player was watching. Chief Inspector Malcolm Thorne, the celebrated head of the city's cybercrimes unit. Thorne wasn't just a cop. He was a gatekeeper of public perception, and he used his unit's immense power to silence critics and maintain his flawless public image. One reclusive hacker and one powerful police chief on a collision course that would expose the dark side of digital authority. The conflict began with a single anonymous blog post. Amy, in her quiet solitude, had discovered a massive security flaw in the city's brand new smart grid infrastructure. It was a gaping hole, a vulnerability that could potentially plunge the city into chaos. The problem: Chief Inspector Thorne's unit had just publicly certified that same grid as perfectly secure. Amy's report, published anonymously, was more than just an embarrassment. It was an accusation. It hinted at gross incompetence, or worse, a deliberate cover-up by Thorne's team. Thorne couldn't arrest a ghost, but he was a master of the digital hunt. Using sophisticated forensics, he traced the breadcrumbs back to one person, Amy Rao. He couldn't prove she wrote it, but he didn't need to. He just needed to send a message. A brutal, terrifying message that would ensure she never spoke up again. The message arrived at 4 a.m. on a misty Tuesday morning. Armed with a completely fabricated Warrant 1, claiming Amy was hosting a server for an international crime syndicate. An unmarked SWAT team descended on her peaceful tiny home. There was no knock. The custom door splintered inwards, and the pre-dawn silence was shattered by the deafening crack of flashbangs and a cacophony of screamed, conflicting orders. This wasn't an arrest. It was an assault. Amy was ripped from her sleep, disoriented and blinded. Before she could even process what was happening, she was tackled, her shoulder dislocating with a sickening pop. Her hands were aggressively bound with zip ties, and she was dragged outside, half-dressed, into the cold, damp air. She was left there bruised, injured, and humiliated, while the real violation began. While Amy was detained, Thorne's team executed the true purpose of the raid. This wasn't about finding evidence, it was about erasing it. They systematically wiped every piece of her hardware, but this was no simple delete command. They deployed military-grade electromagnetic pulse devices, or EMPs, disguised in their report as accidental damage. In an instant, every single one of her personal off-grid storage devices was fried. Decades of research, her digital art, personal backups, memories, her entire digital life gone, vanished into a silent electronic death. They found nothing, of course. No server, no link to a crime syndicate. But they had achieved their goal. They had neutralized Amy's ability to ever republish her findings or prove what they had done. The official report was a masterpiece of fiction. Amy was uncooperative, and the total destruction of her data was necessary to prevent spoliation of evidence. Hours later, she was released without a single charge. She returned to a home that was a wreck, her body injured, and her private world completely erased. How do you fight a ghost? How do you prove a crime when the criminals themselves have destroyed all the evidence? This was the impossible puzzle facing Amy's lawyer, Julian Vance. He wasn't a typical lawyer. He was a specialist in electronic discovery, a digital detective. Julian knew a conventional case was hopeless. Her devices were fried. Her data was gone. So he didn't look for the data. He looked for the echo. He knew that even a perfect digital wipe leaves a shadow. His first target was the warrant itself, the IP address Thorne used to justify the raid, the one supposedly belonging to a criminal server. Julian discovered something damning. That exact IP address had been pinged by a police internal server precisely 36 hours before the raid. The police hadn't discovered the criminal IP address. They had created it. This was the first crack in Thorne's fortress of lies. Next, Julian turned to Amy's unique home. Her off-grid setup had a hyper-efficient custom power monitoring system. He analyzed the solar battery logs. And there it was. A massive, anomalous power drain, far beyond anything the house could produce, happening at the exact hour of the raid. It was the digital fingerprint of the high-power EMP weapons Thorne's team had used. Standard police equipment wouldn't leave a trace like that. This wasn't a search. It was a targeted energy attack. The final piece of the puzzle came from Thorne himself. Julian filed a public records suit, gaining access to the cyber unit's equipment sign-out logs. Every piece of specialized gear had to be checked out and signed for it, and on the destruction logs for the very EMP devices used in the raid, one name appeared: Chief Inspector Malcolm Thorne. His unique digital signature placed the weapon directly in his hands. He was no longer just the supervisor. He was the perpetrator. In court, Julian Vance didn't argue a simple case of a rough arrest. He presented a narrative of something far more sinister, a targeted act of governmental spoliation of evidence and abuse of digital authority. He argued that Thorne's unit hadn't just violated Amy's rights, they had intended to erase her very identity. The jury was captivated. The story of digital forensics, of chasing echoes in the code, was far more compelling than the police's tired defense. The evidence of a planned malicious erasure of a person's life was undeniable. The verdict was a landslide. The court awarded Amy a massive $10 million settlement, not just for her physical injuries, but for the deliberate, catastrophic destruction of her digital livelihood and her privacy. But the victory went beyond money. Chief Inspector Malcolm Thorne was forced to resign in disgrace. He was then indicted on state charges of conspiracy to falsify official documents and misuse of state equipment. The man who had built his career on a flawless public image was convicted and sentenced to prison. The court also placed the entire city police department under an order to audit and publicize the activities of all its specialized surveillance units, ensuring these digital ghost squads could never operate in secret again. Amy recovered. She rebuilt her tiny home, her sanctuary, and with the settlement funds, she did something truly powerful. She launched a foundation dedicated to protecting digital privacy from government overreach, turning her personal nightmare into a shield for countless others. Her voice, which Thorne had tried so desperately to silence, was now louder and more important than ever. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible story of justice in the digital age. If you found this as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of our world. We'll see you in the next one.